it's Carla from Bound to Be Vintage. Welcome back. I'm so glad that you've decided to join me today. I thought I would talk about something a little different, and that is using a pre-made journal. I know there are a lot of people that have heard about junk journaling and are interested in it, but it may just seem overwhelming to choose all the pages, figure out how you're going to bind it, what kind of cover to put on it, soft, fabric, hardcover, hidden spine, open spine. There are just so many choices that it might get overwhelming. Or maybe you have creative burnout and you just don't feel like tackling a journal from start to finish, but you'd like to stay creative. I think the pre-made journal can be an answer. So I thought I would go through one that I used a couple of years ago. You can see it was October of 2021, and talk about what it's like to work in a pre-made journal and the kind of things that you get with it. Now, this particular journal is called a Junkzine. It was created by Trina at Jubilee Flea, and I will leave all her information down below in the description box. She is an Instagram seller and she sells online. She searches all around for books, paper, wallpaper, just the wonderful things that junk journalers like to use. She also creates these junk zines on a monthly basis. They are limited quantities, so you kind of have to watch for when she's going to release one and order ahead of time. Each one is themed. It contains papers that she sourced, generally vintage, and a package of little vintage goodies that come with it. And you'll see more about that when we get inside. They're generally about 24 to 28 pages. So great starting point. I wasn't brand new to junk journaling when I started this, but I was in kind of a slump. I don't love fall like so many people do. I was living at the lake at this point in time, and summer was my absolute favorite there. There were birds, there were boats, there were American flags flying in the wind, just all kind of things that I enjoyed from sitting on my screened-in porch. So for me, when fall comes, winter's just right behind, and it's very cold and gray at the lake in the winter. Not much to recommend it. So I decided that year I wanted to embrace fall, think about the good things, just kind of distract myself from all the stuff that was going on with the pandemic. So I ordered this junk journal and I worked on it in the month of October. So let me show you a little bit more. The cover was all created by Trina, and I left it as is. It's like brown craft paper. She has sponge painted some trees, and you can see she drew the trunks, and she signed it over here. It's bound with 2 colors of seam binding, and she's stamped on the top. On the back, the trees continue, and you can see her stamp for Jubilee Flea. And she's done a little bit of this fun stamping on the covers throughout. Now, I just left the cover as is, but you very easily could take a cover like this and make it your own. You might have washi stickers you wanted to add with fall themes, or you might want to cut out some little forest animals, or you might want to add more texture to the trees, do some torn paper landscape at the bottom, all kinds of possibilities. So when you get a junk journal that's made by someone else, remember it still is yours and do whatever you want with it. So on the inside, she's done some stamping again. And this was the front page. And I really liked this type here that she did. And there's a little introductory letter. And I decided I didn't want to cover this. I wanted this to kind of be a memory of ordering this junk zine and working on it. But what I did do was create a journaling card that I could clip on the front. And this one was about soup. For me, fall starts with a big pot of soup. And I did journal on the back. I don't journal a lot in my journals, but I did here talking about the butternut squash soup that I like to make. And I've just collaged on a piece of cardstock. And if you wonder what kind of ingredients go into a collage, the background paper was a piece of like scrapbook paper that was actually junk because something was wrapped up in it from an antique store. I've got a snippet from a book, a vintage stamp. This was part of a printout that I didn't use all of it. And this part here was the paper doily that I probably got at some sort of discount store. For my focal image, I have the big orange pot. And that came from a Dollar Tree book that I'll show you. In case you're a beginner and you're wondering about how to source images, there are lots of ways, of course. There are many digital creators on Etsy, but you can also go to thrift stores and places like the Dollar Tree and find books that you can cut out images and use them in your work. So this one was called Classic Style. It's by Kate Shelter. Like I said, it was at my Dollar Tree, and I just loved her illustration style. And I thought that any of these things could be cut out and used in a journal. So that's what I've done with several of the images that I'll show you throughout. And that orange pot came from this. I, in fact, went back and bought a second copy of this because sometimes when you cut out of a book, there are images on both sides of the page that you want to use. And I wanted one complete one and one I could start cutting with. So I did go back and get a second. So this is where the pot came from. And I just cut it out and added it to my collage. So I started with a journaling card that's just attached with a fun paperclip. For this page, I wanted to explore autumn fashion in a whimsical way. So I've got a scrapbook paper. I found a dress form template online and put it over a graphics fairy image of a French perfume ad. I've got some ribbon and a little sort of stick-it type thing that has the resin. And then for the skirt, I imagine this to be the back of like a sort of a woodland fairy. On the back, I have stamped this little rubber stamp I had of sort of a damask pattern on different colors of paper. And I've just cut them all out and layered them to just make kind of a fun skirt. Here, there was a small, short, flat page, and I've covered both sides with a leaf print and stamped the word October. I've got a thumb hole here to let you know that this is a pocket that you could put something in. And my leaf paper came from another book, and I'll show you that as well as another idea of sourcing books. This came from Ollie's, and I've talked about them in my thrift hauls. I don't have one locally, but when I travel, I do try to stop in one. This one was called Urban Arboreal, and it's all botanicals, but it has a very modern feel to it. Lots of dark, moody backgrounds and some lighter backgrounds. But I very much like these prints. They're very colorful and fun and a different take on your classic botanical prints. So I used a page from the book to cover this little flap. This page was a piece of vintage wallpaper that Trina had sewn in the signature. And I covered it with a small leaf doily that I found years ago at a dollar store. And I just wrapped it around. This is just the back of the wallpaper. It can just be used for journaling space. On this page, I had a wallpaper I bought years ago at a retirement home thrift store, and I wanted to use it, so I made a little label that says Harvest. I just stamped it with some little vintage letter stamps that I have. And I did some stitching on this page just to play. I did machine stitching around the edge. And then if you can see, I've done some French knots in some of the flowers and on this butterfly here. Again, just for fun, just to play, just to work on my sewing machine skills. I took a very lighthearted approach in this journal, tried not to take myself too seriously, and just play, have fun, and practice. Here on this pricing sheet that again was part of the journal as it came, I've done a collage. All my flowers were cut from an old calendar. That's another great source for images is calendars, whether you find them in a thrift store, a Dollar Tree, any place like that. The only downside I think with calendars is that the images tend to be glossy. If you're going for a vintage look, you might not like the glossy as much. But I just worked with it here, tried to play with it and come up with a farm stand, some seed packets, some pricing. This page was in the journal as is. I did just add a little bit of kind of a jute trim to it. That was probably a Dollar Tree item. And you can see that Trina's made a pocket. I believe she had the pocket stapled. I'm not a fan of the stapled look, so I took them out and just glued it down. I've made a collage on the pocket. This was a wallpaper that Trina included in my little packet of vintage goodies. I believe this ticket is a digital. And then I have the little wood, really thin wood cutouts, like from the Dollar Tree. I included this tag. This came from like an AliExpress type place in a packet years ago. I've lined it with some parchment paper, added some rope and eyelet. I thought it had a nice fall look. And then this was my little packet of goodies in this vintage saving bank envelope from Trina. She had washi taped it. And I'll show you what's left. And I'll try to tell you what I used from it as I went along. A scrap of vintage wallpaper, this little die-cut orange letter, and a vintage playing card with some ducks. This page was grid paper, and Trina had stapled these metallic little leaves, probably a trim you could buy years ago. I'm not sure if they're still available. A company named Wiz Trim had a lot of stuff like this. And she had drawn this little line, dotted line, with pencil. So what I did was I pulled up the leaves that were stapled. I used embroidery floss and stitched the line. And then I attached the leaves as I was stitching the line. And then I've written a quote over here in metallic pen. I did not have my favorite metallic pen and didn't want to order it just for this, so I used what I had. Wasn't real crazy with it. It was a little too thick to get my handwriting the way I wanted, and it's a very flat gold. It didn't give me the metallic look I was looking for. But I did do this quote by John Burroughs. On this page, I wanted to try something with some copper sheets I'd purchased. I had hoped when I purchased them that I could stamp an image on them and then put some flame to it, like a fireplace lighter, and get that really burnished all kinds of colors. This particular tin did not work for that. Apparently, you have to have a certain kind of uncoated tin. I had it left over, so what I did was I typed out a quote on my computer in a typeface I liked. I taped it over this, and then I used a very fine ballpoint kind of stylus and just traced over the letters so the saying was etched into the copper. And it's sing a song of seasons, something bright in all, flowers in the summer, fires in the fall. And I had die cut the tin before I impressed it. It's on some paper that had some leaf inclusions, a handmade paper, and just a patterned paper in the background. I wanted to antique this in some way to try to bring out the writing, but nothing I had really worked. I tried some alcohol inks. I just didn't really have a patina solution. So I just kind of left it as it is and moved on, and it was an experiment. On this page, again, it came with the orange crayon outline and the pencil lines, and I decided to do a list. A list can be kind of a fun technique in junk journaling. So I listed all the hot drinks I was looking forward to trying or having over the course of the cold weather. I've got a couple of faux leaves up here and a wax seal that holds down some actual tea tags. I've added a cutout of a teapot that looked like a pumpkin teapot to me. This was a Graphics Fairy image, and it looked like it was just floating on the page, so I grounded it with a little bit of pattern paper behind it. This is one of my favorite spreads. I'll explore things like this in the future, and that's the fun part of this kind of journal, is it can just be a laboratory for things you want to do in the future. I had purchased some vintage ledgers, and I did not want to commit to using them in this journal, so I scanned them. That's another great thing for beginners. If you don't want to cut up a book, if you have something old, a family heirloom, something you don't want to use, if you have a printer with a scanner, you can scan it. If you don't, you might consider trying to find a copy shop that has high quality copy machines that you can use. They're generally pretty inexpensive, and you can get a nice high grade color copy. I used to go, when I first started, I didn't have a scanner. I used to go to a place called Kinko's, and I think it became the UPS store. So just kind of look online and see what kind of copy shops are available in your neighborhood if you don't have a scanner. So what I did was just kind of a grid collage on background paper, which I eventually glued to this. But I did this collage and then cut it down the middle, and after I'd stitched it. So I initially had the 8.5 by 11 spread and glued my items to it, stitched it, then cut it apart and glued it onto the page. I'm not big at machine stitching on pages. It's kind of hard to do when your book's already bound, and also I don't always like seeing the stitching on the back side of my page, and if I don't want to see it, then I have to worry about covering it. So I do a lot of what I would call faux sewing, where I sew on a piece of paper and then glue it down so it looks like it's sewed to the page, but it's not. So you can see here that I've sewed everywhere something was joined in the collage. Again, these are scans of 2 vintage ledgers or receipts, vintage receipts that I thought matched the theme. The 2 sweaters were cut from that book that I showed you, the first book, and I've just inked the edges with Distress ink and Vintage Photo to kind of grunge them up and just give them more dimension. This was a die cut I had that looks like knitting, and this was a stamp I had that again looks like knitting, and I was just very happy with how this page turned out. I did stitch around this Marathon Knitting Mills. That's a vintage industrial stamp that I had purchased, and I glued on one of these vintage buttons that has the really large holes in it. Generally, I like thread in my buttonholes, but with this one, it actually looked better without it, I thought. Oh, and this is just some pattern paper I had. I thought the houndstooth check in orange worked really well. On this page, I made an envelope. I do have a We Are Memory Keepers envelope board. I used another page from that botanical book that I just showed you. I've got a label. I believe that was a Graphics Fairy label. I've added a label to the back as well. And I did actually go out and get a dried up leaf from the trees at the lake that looked like it matched to put in the envelope. I made a tuck spot from the other part of that page. And again, I've done my faux stitching where I stitched on the paper and then glued it down. I've got another label. And this page with a similar looking leaf was another goodie that was part of the Vintage Goodies pack that came with this journal. It's a page from one of those tree identification guides. And some pattern paper to cover up the paper that was existing. On a lot of these pages, I just wanted a pattern paper in the background. Trina has a variety of pages, kinds of paper for pages throughout, and some of them will have little prompts or things to get you started. So that's also good if you're a beginner. I kind of knew what I wanted to do with the page, so I just glued over those things. This page was in the journal as is. It's one of those grid pages torn from a spiral notebook. And I had these 2 cute images. I believe they're Graphics Fairy on how to draw a couple of fall animals. So I just attached them with washi tape. And I thought it would be fun in the future, perhaps when one of my grandchildren gets older, to go in here and let them try sketching the animal on the page. Here's the other side of that paper that made a pocket. And again, I just added some jute trim I did another little collage. The wallpaper and the little stamp were part of the goodies from Trina. I've done another little wood cutout and a little bit of baker's twine. This notebook, which is unused in my journal, came with the Vintage Goodies packet, and this could have been altered in any kind of way. Here's the back side of that pricing sheet, and I've just attached a postcard that came with something I ordered. And again, here's your junk mail aspect of a junk journal. Anything you get in the mail can often be turned into great ephemera. So this gives me another journaling spot if I wanted to record something on the back. And I've just got this funky little orange clip that I've clipped it on with. This is the back side of that wallpaper page that was in there. I've stamped each with the vintage sign making stamp that I have. I added some eyelets and a little bit of rope trim to make a handle. I wanted it to kind of look like a shopping bag. And then I've got a pumpkin doily that again was probably a Dollar Tree purchase, and some pattern paper. At this point, I was just really playing and getting whimsical with all of this as I ended the journal and kind of headed into Halloween. Here was another little tag that just came in a multi-pack from one of the inexpensive online vendors. I had a little piece of paper that looks like a tree trunk, but it's a metallic. So I attached the ticket to that with some baker's twine and orange. And on the back, I had a little piece of leftover image that I'd done on some tracing paper. And I'd cut off the rose part to use, and what was left with this spider web. And I thought that was perfect for a fall journal. Starting in September, I see tons of spider webs in the morning with dew in them, and you see the pretty pattern. I picked a black and white washi tape to just attach it, and then underneath on this little lined page that had been included, I did a little poem about spider webs. As I'm finishing up the journal, we're heading into Halloween. I wanted to do a fortune teller. So I had this thin, sheer, slightly metallic material that was a drapery sample, and I had some metallic trim. So I decided to make kind of a fortune teller's booth with curtains. So I didn't have any of those little coins, and I knew I wanted to do the coins because her outfit has a lot of coins on it. But I did have that copper that I showed you earlier. So I had a little die cut of just some interesting little circular design. So I cut out 3 to use them as coins. I thought that worked pretty well. And then when you open the curtains, you see our fortune teller. You can see all the coins on her outfit. I had this really wild handmade paper that came in a sample pack that's all these gold and copper swirls. And I wasn't sure where I'd use something like that, but I thought it made rather a mystical background for the fortune teller. So I've got the teacup so she can read your tea leaves, and a palm so she can read your palm. These are Graphics Fairy images. And I had some little tiny gold rub-ons from the Dollar Tree. So I added actual little leaf rub-ons to the inside of the teacup for the tea leaves. And then for the last page, I wanted to incorporate an image that Trina had on this page that normally wouldn't be my style. So I found this Bat Lady that's a Graphics Fairy image. I've added tiny little rhinestone eyes. I stamped kind of a funky looking chandelier, and I gave her a pattern paper floor. Wanted to make sure we knew it was October 31st, her Halloween party, and I gave her a lace curtain to reveal the guest. And that was the skeleton that Trina had on the page. Trina stamped that, and then I have some old letterpress type of these 2 cats with their tails entwined to spell the word Halloween. So I got that to stamp on some paper, cut it into a stamp shape, and added it to the page to finish the journal. I hope you've enjoyed this flip through of a pre-made journal. Like I said, great thing for a beginner, or if you're just creatively stuck, if you want a little workbook where you can just try out ideas without committing it to an actual junk journal that you're thinking about making for someone or selling or something else where you're maybe not comfortable experimenting. I hope you'll join me for future videos. I do thrift hauls, journal flip throughs, and a tutorial here or there.